Welcome to Challenging Colonialism, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of Indigenous California. This bonus episode is a recording of the opening comments from a conference held at the Santa Cruz Mission State Historic Park on August 27, 2021. The event was held the day prior to the El Camino bell removal in Santa Cruz and was called Telling and Teaching the Truth of the California Missions, and was co-sponsored by the Amamutsan Tribal Band, the Ohlone Costaloan Esselen Nation, the UC Santa Cruz American Indian Resource Center, and the University of California Critical Mission Studies program. This is the first half of a panel entitled Telling the Truth of the California Missions. The panel was moderated by Merri Lopez Keifer, Senior Advisor to the Tribal Council of the San Luis Rey Band of Mission Indians, and included a talk by Dr. Lee Panich titled Centering Ohlone Presence at Mission Santa Clara and Santa Clara University. Dr. Panich is the author of After St. Sarah, Unearthing Indigenous Histories at the California Missions. This talk is followed by Alexi Sigona, Amamutsan, and Annie Taylor of the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management at UC Berkeley, giving a talk entitled Revitalizing Reciprocal Relations with Land, Amamutsan Pathways to Reconnection.
So thank you again. My name is Merri Lopez Keifer. I'm a tribal member of the San Luis Rey Band of Mission Indians. The San Luis Rey Mission is located in Oceanside, California in San Diego County, and my ancestors come from that mission. I'm also a senior advisor to the San Luis Rey Band of Mission Indians Tribal Council. And a member of the California Native American Heritage Commission, and a member of the University of California's Office of the President's Native American Advisory Council. And it's my honor to be the co-chair of the University of California's Critical Mission Studies Project. We'll next hear from Dr. Lee Panich in his discussion of centering Ohlone Presence at Mission Santa Clara and Santa Clara University.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I want to start by acknowledging that we are gathered on this beautiful afternoon on the unceded lands of the Uipi tribe of the Waswas Nation that is stewarded and cared for today by the Amamutsan Tribal Band. I also want to thank the organizers for putting on this event. It's really great. As we are chatting up here, this is the first in-person kind of conference I've been to in a long time, so I really am appreciative of everybody being here in person and tuning in online. I also want to acknowledge that my co-author, Gloria Gomez, who's a former tribal council member of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area, couldn't be here today, but she sends her regards, and I also consulted before this talk with Monica Ariano, who's the vice chairwoman of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. And I'll be talking about work that also includes Andrew Galvin and other members of the Ohlone Indian tribe that we've been doing at Santa Clara University. And I'm really pleased that through the hard work of tribal elders and other tribal citizens that we're at a place where we can come together and talk about how to tell the truth of the California missions and how to teach that truth to the next generation. So just a quick background on Santa Clara University and Mission Santa Clara. So I'm a professor of anthropology at Santa Clara University, and if you've ever been to our campus, you'll know that it is on the site of Mission Santa Clara, and it's the only institution or institute of higher education to be located at a California mission site. And that is kind of a heavy thing. The campus today includes the sites of 3 different mission churches. Like many other California missions, Santa Clara, they had to move the actual complex around due to floods and earthquakes and that kind of thing. There's 2 main cemeteries associated with those sites. There's also the native rancheria, the native neighborhood, that while the mission kind of moved, I guess, in a clockwise fashion, the rancheria stayed in the center. And there, over the years from 1777 when it was founded until the 1840s, when it was eventually abandoned, there were more than 11,000 people baptized at Mission Santa Clara. And these were people of local Ohlone descent, and then later on, after 1810, primarily from the Central Valley, people speaking Yokuts and Plains Miwok languages. In addition to that, we also have on our campus a pre-contact site known as Tamian, And as other speakers have pointed out, Native people have been here in California since time immemorial. We know through archaeology that this particular settlement was occupied as early as 2,500 years ago. So there's a very deep presence on our campus. Yet the university hasn't always been very good about telling the truth of that presence, to be honest. The college was founded in 1851. It was transferred from the Franciscans to the Jesuits to found Santa Clara College, as it was then known. Today it's Santa Clara University. And almost immediately, the Jesuits started dismantling the mission. Of course, as other speakers have noted, most of the land, most of the resources were already essentially stolen by colonial elites and then eventually by US squatters. So it was really only the mission in the immediate complex. But the Jesuits, within a decade or so, had started building over the adobe buildings and turned it into kind of a Gothic cathedral-looking church. And so in that sense, Santa Clara resisted a little bit of that kind of romantic turn that scholars like Elizabeth Kreider-Reed have talked about in terms of how the missions that were essentially forgotten by early white settlers, primarily Protestant coming from the East Coast, eventually became kind of the center of tourism and of this kind of California image, primarily to serve as a European anchor to lure other Anglo-Americans from the East Coast to come out to California. It was kind of a real estate scam in some ways. And so Santa Clara, came a little late to our campus. It wasn't until 1907 that some of this, the romanticizing of the mission really got going. And that occurred when PG&E, quote unquote, discovered the cemetery associated with the third mission complex. I won't get into the weeds on all the locations and stuff, but this is a site that had been marked on maps going back to the 1850s, so the discovery is in scare quotes. But of course, this was something of a major, momentous find, so to speak, in the local press. There were multiple newspaper articles all around the Bay Area, as far away as Fresno and other places, commenting on this discovery of the mission site. And this is really, I think, where some of the untruths begin. Because as others have talked about, and as scholars like Gene O'Brien have talked about for the East Coast, settlers have used different ways to kind of put Native people in the past and to anchor European presence, so in her words, firsting and lasting. So at Santa Clara, we see this starting around 1907. The cemetery and the church complex were rediscovered in October, and by November there was a huge celebration at the campus, and in the words of the people putting it on, the town of Santa Clara and the college in those days, it was to celebrate the advent of civilization on the Sunset Shore. And Native people were totally written out of it. In fact, the remains of people from the cemetery were farmed out to different universities and whatnot. A total desecration of the cemetery. At the same time that the local people were using the mission as a way to kind of anchor European presence in the area. And this was actually culminated, speaking of bells, in 1929. The fifth mission church burned down in 1926. They built a new mission church. King Alfonso of Spain commissioned a new mission bell, and that was dedicated on Columbus Day in 1929. So it's all tying into this, kind of European origins of California. And then this was echoed many decades later in the 1990s with the 500-year anniversary of Columbus's first voyage to the Americas. And this actually also coincided, I'm an archaeologist, so I have a little bit of an archaeological bent on this, but it also coincided with more archaeological work at that same third mission site associated with the rerouting of the Camino Real, actually, in Santa Clara. And when the archaeological work was done, the highway was rerouted, the city and the university built an archaeological park that commemorates the actual mission complex. And that you can go there today on our campus. It's marked out in pavers. It has 6 feet of fill on top of it to protect it. But yet the native cemetery, the rancheria where Native people lived at the mission, is totally unmarked today. So you can see how these kind of erasures build on each other. And in fact, the only plaque that could have potentially mentioned Native people at the archaeological park simply refers to the many dwellers who lived around the mission. So just total erasure. Now, of course, Ohlone people have not just sat back and let this happen. The Muwekma Ohlone tribe has been involved in stuff on our campus going back to the 1980s. I was talking to Chairwoman Charlene Nijma, who remembers as a young woman participating in the construction of a Thule house on our campus. So they've been present. They actually, through their consulting services, have helped mitigate some of the impacts to different archaeological ancestral sites on our campus. And so have, Pride and other groups, Andy Galvin, the Ohlone Indian tribe, other Ohlone groups around the Bay Area have served as MLDs. Chairman Lopez and Martin were talking about some of the kind of shameful treatment of ancestral remains earlier in the program, but yet Ohlone people have inserted themselves where they can, where there is room in the laws to be there to make sure that things are handled in the correct way, as limited as that is. I want to acknowledge that. And so, Ohlone people have inserted themselves into these issues on campus, but there hasn't been, until very recently, any kind of unified approach and no coordination about how we can best kind of center Ohlone presence and experience at our campus and at Mission Santa Clara in particular. So there's a couple of different things going on right now that I just want to talk about that involve, again, folks from the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and the Ohlone Indian tribe, and we'll kind of talk about some of that work that we're doing together. The first thing is kind of a top-down, a working group, which is kind of like the most bland thing that you can imagine from an institutional perspective, but 3 years ago, I guess, our outgoing president at that time, Father Michael Eng, commissioned an Ohlone history working group. And so Charlene Nijma, chairwoman of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, and Andy Galvin, president of the Ohlone Indian tribe, were on this working group. I was on it, and as were other stakeholders from campus. And so basically, this work kind of continued into the pandemic, which stretched it out longer than we would have liked. But the charge was to take a look at the way that mission history and Ohlone history and heritage are commemorated on our campus. And so we took a very comprehensive look down to the types of paintings that are hanging in different campus buildings. And so the report came out last summer. It's online if you want to take a look at it. But we did recommend some immediate actions. One actually doesn't have to do with the mission period per se, but it turns out that there was a plaque commemorating Peter Burnett in the Mission Church. And if you don't know, Peter Burnett was the first American governor of California, and he advocated for a war of extermination, his words, against Native people. And it turns out he was also on the founding board of trustees of Santa Clara College, now Santa Clara University. His son was one of the first graduates, and his grandkids were on the faculty. So really interesting connections that we were all learning about between kind of one of the architects of the genocide against Native people and our university. So that was item number one, get rid of the plaque, so that's done. And that was something that Andy Galvin in particular had been advocating for years. The second immediate action was to remove the Junipero Serra statue from campus. That was one of the William H. Hannon Foundation statues that you see at many Catholic schools and mission sites throughout California, placed in the 1990s. So that was removed. There's some community conversation that's going to happen about what to happen next with the bee attack. With the Junipero Serra statue, the Muwekma Muwekma chairwoman Charlene Nijma has stated that she would like to see it contextualized in the museum to talk about talk about Serra as a figure, what he stood for at the mission period, and how he has been mythologized over the years. So to use it as a way to kind of peel back a little bit of that romanticization, a little bit of that mythology. And then there's also future work that will take place. One of the things kind of interesting, listening to Martin's talk earlier, one of the things the working group recommended was getting at these individual histories, right? Histories of resistance, histories of perseverance of Native people at the mission. How can we bring that story to life? So that's one of the things we'll be addressing as we move forward. And then just lastly on that front, it's just also to acknowledge that it's not just about the past, but one of the other recommendations, just checking on my time, was to set up scholarships for Ohlone students and Native Californian students in the future. So that's something we're working on. Now the other side of the coin is kind of bottom-up work. And so the university working group, this kind of thing takes a lot of time. We have to find money and that sort of thing. But there's a lot we can do working with the local Ohlone community whose ancestors came through Mission Santa Clara, survived Mission Santa Clara. There's a lot we can do in the interim. And so one of the things that this is, the goal of this is to report on a community-initiated partnership grant that we received from the University of California Critical Mission Studies program. And Amy Luke, who's here, and Matt Crute of Arizona State University were also on this grant. And again, we worked with the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and the Ohlone Indian tribe. And the idea was to kind of be more nimble, to put some plans into action in the short term while these other things are happening. And so working with the community partners, the overarching theme has been we are here still. So how do we put that kind of Ohlone presence back into the campus? And the way we wanted to do this, again, was to have Ohlone people whose ancestors survived the mission tell the story in their own words. And so initially we wanted to do video interviews and recordings, but of course COVID kind of threw a wrench in that. So we've done some other things. We did a virtual walking tour through Google Earth, which is pretty cool. You can find it online. It's on the Community Heritage Lab website at s01e01.edu. And there we weren't able to incorporate video, but we're able to incorporate text from different community partners talking about how they viewed the mission. We have stops. We kind of consulted on where we should stop. On the walking tour, it goes through the physical part of the campus and talks about historic people like Yoskalo, who was rebelled against Mission Santa Clara in the 1830s. So getting that kind of those individual stories of Native freedom fighters and that kind of thing, and giving kind of contemporary Ohlone perspectives on that history. The other thing we're doing is we are now this fall starting to kind of put together a website that's going to look at, kind of be a resource hub for people at Santa Clara or outside about local kind of Ohlone history and the native history of Mission Santa Clara. So again, we're working with those groups to kind of put together a website that will have resources that the community thinks or feels best represents their voices on this matter. And so not to have kind of outside experts dictating what is going to be taught about the mission, but instead to have them kind of forefront their experience. And then lastly, kind of even further down the line, where we had a grant that Amy put together from the National Endowment of the Humanities to put together kind of a more robust virtual reality or augmented reality experience that again would kind of center those Ohlone community voices and experiences. That would really, the intent is to tie the past to the present. Under that theme, we are here still. And then lastly, I just want to wrap up with, again, I'm sorry that my co-authors from the Muwekma Ohlone tribe couldn't be here for them to kind of talk to you about this in their own words. But I just want to kind of end with a quote from Charlene Nijma, who again is the chairwoman of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. And it's a quote that, we were talking about, how do they as a tribe, how does she as an individual, as a tribal leader, see the importance of the mission period or not? And this is what she said: "It's a story, I think, that needs to be told for what it is, the truth." So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Panich. Our last panelists is Alexi Sagona from the Ama Mutsun Band and Annie Taylor from UC Berkeley, and they're going to be speaking to revitalizing reciprocal relations with land, the Ama Mutsun's pathways to reconnection.
Thank you so much, and it's an honor to be here amongst these distinguished scholars and elders and other folks here. Mishmin Truhis Kanraka Alexi. My name is Alexi Sagona, and I'm a member of the Ama Mutsun Tribal Band and PhD student in Environmental Science, Policy, and Management in the Division of Society and Environment at UC Berkeley.
Hi everyone, I'm Annie Taylor. I'm also in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management at UC Berkeley with Alexi. And I'm going to kick it off today to talk to you a little bit about the background of how we got to be working together on this project. So luckily, Alexi and I met actually just before we began our graduate studies at Berkeley, and we decided to launch an interdisciplinary project. This is very ambitious, where Alexi could lead the social science piece, the ethnographic piece, and I could lead the geospatial and ecological pieces. And we thought, together we can do some really awesome work with the Ama Mutsun Tribal Band and the Ama Mutsun Land Trust. And so for me, as a white and non-native researcher, I just have to say what a privilege it is for me to work with the Ama Mutsun Tribal Band. It really is an amazing experience, and the trust that is instilled in us, we do not take for granted. And just the work that the tribe is doing. It's wonderful to get to contribute to all of those projects. So we are collaborating with the tribe generally on our PhD research, but today we'll be talking about a project that was funded through the Critical Mission Studies grant program, and we're very grateful. So in that project, we set out to study the social and ecological legacies of the mission system through relationships between Ama Mutsun people and their homelands. So as we've heard today, all these wonderful speakers, the issues of indigenous erasure and dispossession are complex and cannot be separated from issues of ecological and environmental degradation. And so we set out to study these ecological and cultural issues together. So today we'll be talking about some of the work that was funded, including interviews with Amamutsan tribal members. So I'll talk through some of the interview work. Alexi will take us through some of our main findings, and then we'll each talk through the threads of research that have emerged from those wonderful conversations. So over the past year, we conducted 12 interviews with Amamutsan tribal members, most of which were on Zoom, as you might have predicted. And these conversations allowed us really to begin, especially me, to begin building relationships with Amamutsan people and to hear those perspectives in some depth. And all of our research methods and questions have been directly changed and informed and transformed by the ideas and the questions and the stories of those people, those interview participants. And although that allowed us to start our research in a way we knew would be useful and relevant to a part of the Amamutsan community, we know that iteration and development and co-development is not over, and so that'll be an ongoing process. But we'll talk about what we've been able to start so far. I'm just to make sure I didn't miss anything else. I think I'm ready to hand it over to you to talk about what we found.
Yes, thank you, Annie. And, I think this kind of falls in line with what Dr. Martin Rizzo Martinez was talking about with centering the voices of Indigenous peoples, right? So using interviews as a method to center these voices is really powerful. And I'm actually really excited to share, a little bit of what we found within these interviews. And so, these are just with a few select community members. And so we identified community members with experience with land-based cultural practices such as gathering or tending, because our project is centered on the contemporary period and human-land relationships. And so these were semi-structured interviews, and they centered around topics participants had the most experience with. We had dance captains, we had basket makers, we had food producers, right? And so we were able to really just ask them, what they were most passionate about, and it really has helped guide our research as, junior scholars, as well as, kind of defined 3 different themes that we're going to share with you that have emerged within these interviews. So our first theme identified was that participants chose to center contemporary tribal resilience and thinking about the well-being of the future generations when asked about the instance of Spanish colonization and its effects. For example, one participant discussed how dwelling on the mission history was haunting and depressing, and how they try to stay focused on moving forward to honor their ancestors and bring the culture back, and passing this down to future generations. And another participant discussed how they did not want to give light to the things the Spanish did to their ancestors in our interview, and how they focused on tribal resilience and still being here today, as Dr. Rodriguez mentioned. We found this theme of focusing on the present and future resilience in line with Indigenous scholar Eve Tuck's call for moving away from a damage-centered research framework. Instead, we have centered resistance to ongoing legacies of colonialism and tribal perspectives of creating change that's more aligned with Eve Tuck's support for centering desire instead of damage while conducting research with Indigenous communities. And our second theme that we found within these interviews was around the legacies of colonialism, which began with the mission period, of course, here in California, and the effects on access to land and the important kinship relations with non-human life. And so, as many of you all know, Indigenous folks, see non-human life as kin, as relatives, right? Not as things that you can own, for example. So one participant understood colonization as taking away opportunities to connect to land, to fulfill cultural responsibilities, and this caused intergenerational trauma in the community today. And another community member understood introduced species as being like a disease similar to the diseases introduced in colonialism that decimated native populations. Excuse me. And to practice certain components of culture, tribe members rely on accessing land, which can pose a problem since the Amamutsan community does not own any land. Dr. Rodriguez mentioned, a tree without roots. How can you be landless and still have, be there and hold on to your culture? And one participant described conducting stewardship on Amamutsan ancestral land that was held by private landowners as being difficult because some of these landowners were the same families of who stole the land from the tribe. And it was kind of disheartening because this participant talked about how they cannot personally afford to live on their own homelands. So relationships can be a great way forward, but kind of knowing that their ancestors, or part of that problem, as Chairman Lopez was talking about, that responsibility, can sometimes be difficult for community members today to be on these lands. And on a related note of accessing lands owned by others, another participant discussed how an access agreement with a local landholding agency required having to ask permission every time they wanted access. And they mentioned how their ancestors did not have to ask for permission, and they should not have to either. So, these participants understood the decimation of the ecosystem as well as land dispossession as both being barriers to engage in these important relationships between the tribe and land. And I want to note sociologist Kari Norgard, who describes the ecological degradation of landscapes as being a part of settler colonialism. And their work is up in Northern California. And the final third theme that I wanted to talk about was that ownership, while problematic, would support restoring these relationships to land. This final theme kind of aligns with our commitment to center desire-based research and explores the benefits of owning property, and is kind of something that we found a lot of participants really interested in exploring and chatting about in our interviews. So one participant shared a story of gathering acorns on a public preserve while a park docent tour was occurring. They overheard the docent describing Native American practices as being in the past, while they were simultaneously out there gathering traditional foods. The participant understood this mentality of there being no more natives left as actually stemming from the tribe not having a place to come together and educate the public, and understood that as being an impetus for owning land being important for the community. Another participant explained how basketry plants need to be regularly tended for many years to be usable, and how access limitations make the process incredibly difficult. They understood having land as being important to carry on the traditional basketry. And for some of these access agreements that the Amamutsun community have, they're on 5-year basis. And so, after 5 years, maybe these basketry materials might not be able to be gathered. And so there's kind of that insecurity, and it takes many, many hours to make baskets, so I've been told. And finally, one participant discussed how land ownership does not align with Amamutsun cultural values, as like many indigenous values of owning land, but it would still be helpful for the community, and there could be opportunities to be more relational with land instead of enforcing the concept of ownership over other human kin. Sort of like a, kind of let's engage in this system and change it at the same time, because of the difficulties of not owning land, is so tremendous for indigenous communities whose culture relies on land and these, land-based culture. So as Amamutsun Tribal Band continues to grow their stewardship programs and partner with other landholding agencies, the question of whether ownership is necessary to fulfill community needs, or if access held by, or access to land, held by partners is suitable, is of great significance. Whether or not, these priorities should be about ownership or about, really getting great access agreements is I think, important to think about. And so to summarize these main 3 themes, we found that, first, community members advocate for centering their contemporary experiences and the well-being of future generations, rather than discussing the traumatic experiences occurring during mission times. It's sort of this desire-based research that we're called to do. Second, that introduced species and land dispossession both play a role in continuing to separate tribe members from the lands and culture that depends on native landscapes. And Annie is going to be able to, share a little bit more about the ecological side of this. And finally, while land ownership may not align with cultural values, it would push back against the idea that Native people are of the past and allow for the community to come together and support important cultural practices depending on regular access and stewardship, such as gathering basketry materials. And so next, I want to turn to a case study of Amamutsun land dispossession and a future thread of our research. So as Annie and I noted, we kind of use these interviews to ground our research, and we have a couple things that we want to share, of how we've been able to, go off of what these community members have said for future publications and research. And so here I want to talk about one clear example of the impacts on human-land relations can be observed through historical land dispossession of the Amamutsun. And to better understand this land dispossession, which started in the mission period, we have conducted research into one mission-era rancho that continues to be a site of contention for the tribe, and that is known as Urastock. So today, the tribe is leading the Protect Eurostock campaign to protect this sacred site from a proposed sand and gravel mine. This was also a mission-era rancho that was owned and ran by Mission San Juan Bautista, just a few miles away from here, inland. We believe that the historical and ongoing property disputes and issues of Amamutsun access to this Eurostock area highlight the different forms of severing tribal relationships to land during the 3 waves of colonization. And so, we've conducted this archival research to better understand how the Spanish, Mexican, and early American era land claims of Rancho Eurostock have kind of shaped this landscape. Starting in 1803, there were, these issues between settlers of, who owns this land. And it's always been seen as a sacred site for the community. And the community has had to kind of, find ways to resist, these commodification of this land in this area. And so as part of our project, we've collaborated with the Amamutsun Land Trust. And this past July, we held a community event at an adjacent parcel held by the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County, right next to Eurostock Rancho. So this was the first large community gathering occurring in the Eurostock area. And we're able to utilize our research, this archival research, for educational materials for community members on that day. And this event was part of our commitment as researchers to support the interests of tribe members in accessing and connecting with land and with Amamutsun homelands. So we wanted to bring that up. It was a really wonderful day, and it wasn't just our archival research at all. It was the elders and the community members who were able to talk about stewardship and the history of that land that really made that day special, and we were just so grateful to be able to be a part of it. And so next I want to pass it on to Annie, who's going to share another component of our research.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Alexi has just really eloquently mentioned, this socio-ecological lens is critical to our study of the mission period because of the devastating impacts on people and land, and how those are so deeply connected. And in particular, I was so excited, Chairman Lopez mentioned this earlier, California's coastal grasslands are among the most biodiverse and also the most endangered ecosystems in the world. This is primarily due to development, also agriculture, introduction of invasive species, and fire suppression, that disconnection from indigenous stewardship here. And those are all things that are directly linked to the mission period. So there's this need then for healing both from cultural oppression and also the ecological degradation and disconnection. And this was reflected by many interview participants in that second theme that Alexi mentioned of kinship with non-human life. So I first read about reciprocal restoration in the work of Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who, I'll use her words, she stresses that the restoration of native ecosystems cannot be separated from the restoration of native cultures. And this idea of restoring culture and ecosystems is a central goal of the tribe. So much of our research now is focused on this reciprocal restoration. Studying the relationships between moots and stewardship practices, these cultural resources on the landscape, as well as climatic changes such as drought and wildfire. And all of this is in service of guiding future stewardship and healing with this land. I want to just pause here to note that a lot of my work involves GIS or mapping, and I use those words interchangeably. And I do believe these tools are useful, but we have to acknowledge they've been used globally for the seizure and occupation of indigenous lands. These are tools with colonial and military origins, and so it's important, for me as a non-native researcher trained in GIS to be accountable to that history and accountable also to the Amamutsun community in finding new and just ways to apply those tools. So in addition to our ecological questions as those emerge from the participants, our research is also becoming an exploration of what it means to build novel spatial representation of Amamutsun landscapes and stories and relationship. And I'm actually fairly hopeful that we can do this together because maps are an essentially relational thing. They, at their essence, try to describe how things are related spatially to each other. So I'm excited to see how we can grow this tool in a number of different ways with the tribe. And I mentioned maps because our interviews illustrated how maps and other spatial tools could be useful in promoting tribal members' access to cultural resources on the land. So whether that be food and medicine plants or basketry plants, as Alexi has mentioned, or plants used for ceremony, there's this ability to use maps to find those places. So I got very excited, and we began to pull together these data sets of different cultural resources and plants. And some of these data sets, the Native Stewardship Corps of the tribal band had collected themselves. And so I was getting all excited, building these maps of cultural resources. And it was just around this time that we spoke with someone in an interview, and they spoke about the importance of hunting and gathering in a good way, and that the gratitude and humility of their approach was so essential to those activities. And I was just struck. Stewardship and gathering is not just knowing when and where to go to find something. It's not just a map. It's all of the cultural, relational values of the Amamutsan people that just maybe can't be shown or housed in sort of a more Western framework map or database. And so that helped me realize how critical it is in this partnership with the tribe that the tribe owns and has exclusive access to those data and those maps involving cultural resources, because Amamutsan people and culture are what give those maps life and meaning. Indigenous philosopher Kyle White, Alexi actually gave me this idea. He speaks about traditional ecological knowledge being situated and embodied, meaning it cannot be taken out of its cultural context. And so that's something that is grounding us moving forward. I'm just going to check if I'm missing anything. So initially what this work looks like is that we're beginning to map and model both the abundance and the seasonality of food and medicine plants in this area, in the broader stewardship area of the Amamutsan tribal band. And we've got lots of other mapping projects going on, and all of this is also helping us explore what novel spatial representations look like. What is an Amamutsan spatial knowledge system, and exploring that with broader parts of the community. So I also want to say that a key piece of this work that we're excited to do is to translate these spatial knowledge systems and relationships for landowning agencies. So to speak to that third theme that emerged from our interviews, that having a place to go, having roots, and at the very least access and rights to gather is so critical for culture to renew itself and continue. So a big piece of this work will be translating our work for these Western frameworks and these landowning agencies and other private landowners to ensure that the reciprocal restoration and healing that the Amamutsan tribal band is leading can continue and can actually be resourced so to ensure that it continues perpetually. And so this might look like guiding management recommendations for parks agencies, when to avoid and where to avoid things like using herbicide, or suitable times of year to mow or burn if agencies are able to do that type of stewardship. It could also involve expanding gathering access. So if we're able to show that there are hotspots in places where so many cultural resources are present and would depend on continued reciprocal restoration with Amamutsan people, we can advocate for that access in this very, sort of comfortable Western framework way through maps. So we're hoping to do some of that translation work as well in order to really meet both the second and the third themes of the interviews from the people that we spoke with.
Thank you very much. I just want to say thank you so much for Alexi and Annie. You're doing groundbreaking work, and I can see how your project will benefit all tribal communities in California, especially since helping build relationships with state parks for that harvesting and gathering for tribes. So thank you so much. That concludes our panels, and we'd like to open it up for some brief questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions.
So the question was, for folks who are interested in this reciprocal restoration, what would be a good way to take part? And I also encourage you to talk with Chairman Lopez after this, but what I can say is that the Amamutsan Land Trust is doing a native plant propagation program up in Pescadero, where there is a volunteer program every Monday and Friday to help restore indigenous cultural landscapes at Quiroste Valley Cultural Preserve, and there should be more information on the website.
Each of our panelists shared a large amount of information, and there's just a lot of work happening, so I would like to applaud the UC's Critical Mission Studies project for funding all of this research, and thank you so much.